And it was my CEO who stepped in and said, look, the reason you're doing what you're doing is because I pushed you. It's my sense of impatience that got you where you are. I told the board it's me that drove you. And in that moment, he made it okay for me to fuck up. Because he told me in that moment, you fuck up, I got your back. And I'm the one this falls on, not you.
What's up, Standouts? It's Yolanda, and this is episode number 4 of How She Did It. I'm interviewing my friend Sowmya Murthy, who is the Chief Marketing Officer for 7 Lake Technologies, a challenger brand in the big data technology space. I love chatting with women who have chief or head in their title because I know they will have some great stories and lessons learned. And Sowmya didn't disappoint. I think you will get a lot out of this episode. For links to what we chat about in this episode, check out the show notes page for this episode at nts.today/4. And now, let's start the show.
Hi, y'all. I'm Sowmya Murthy, and there's so many ways to describe me, but I'll start with what you asked, which is what do I do? I'm a Chief Marketing Officer at 7 Lakes Technologies. It's a challenger brand in the big data technology space, and we focus very much on the oil and gas industry.
Tell me a little bit about your early days.
I grew up in Bangalore, India. My childhood was filled with a lot of play, a lot of mango eating competitions in the backyard, and sitting on stoops and making as many friends who would pass me by, and filled with a lot of people. And I literally had a village raising me, my mom's family, my dad's family. So I was in the middle of a lot of people. So a lot of love, a lot of play, a lot of different languages. I moved here when I was 16.
What did you do to get rid of your accent?
I think if you'd put me in Scotland, I would have most likely sounded Scottish and you wouldn't have known. One of my superpowers is to get the other person to see themselves in me so that they can make space to see me eventually. And to answer your question a little bit more tactically, I watched a shit ton of Nick at Night, Taxi and Happy Days. And so culturally, I was about a generation behind, so I'd go to school and say you dig, and I would say stuff that just wasn't, and I had a very Valley girl. You'll still hear that in me. It's not because I live in the Valley now. It's because it's where I learned Americana.
Was there a work relocation, or why did your family
Yeah, so
move
my
to
mom,
the US?
my aunt, who to this day is probably one of the most generous women I know, she is a OBGYN, and she moved to Ireland and to America, and she started a practice here, and she sponsored her siblings. And my mother is the oldest sibling, and these two were very close with each other. And so it was only a matter of time. And we applied. It takes 10 plus years to get a green card, right? So they'd applied, I think in, I don't know, we came here in 92, probably 82-ish. And so you set it and forget it. You don't sit around for 10 years. And so one day, my mom came knocking on my door. I was about to go to I just started college at 16, and she said, pack up, we're moving countries. And it was just a sad day, right?
Wow. Why was it sad?
Teenage girl in the bloom of her life, making brand new friends, and I was studying to be a doctor. Life had very different plans for me.
Okay, so I'm gonna backtrack a little bit.
Yeah.
So you graduated high school when you were 16. Tell me a little bit about high school.
When I came to America, I made a decision to take a year back. So I'd finished 10th grade, and in India, you just go straight to college from there. So I went and repeated my 10th, primarily because I said, this is my cultural year. I'm going to learn Americana. So that year, I really just sat back and soaked in the culture, the accent. I spent most of my time just playing and finding out about, I didn't know what a nickel and a dime was, just simple things that everyone takes for granted. I had to learn. High school was torturous, right? Because 1, accent, 2, I'm one of maybe a handful of non-white kids in the school.
Mm-hmm.
And coming from the culture I did, we hold hands and we touch a lot, we hug. And so I would have Butch and Dyke written on my lockers, which I had to go look up the dictionary and like, what's that? And I was like, well, what is a lesbian? And so I didn't even know enough to know that it was coming from a place of hate. What I learned was in America, people have a lot of issues about proximity of space and demonstrating love physically. So there was all this part of like, I had to learn not to be me. And that part was most of what high school was. What I ended up doing, because I had to channel it somewhere, I ended up starting a debate team. I would enter radio shows. I was like, you don't like my accent? I'm going to say the Pledge of Allegiance to you every day on the loudspeaker. I basically said, you don't think this is cool? I'm going to be everywhere. I don't know exactly why I reacted that way. And I don't even know it was a reaction, except for I didn't have any other way to express. I chose media.
You could have approached that really in two ways. The way that you did, or you could have just shut down.
Yeah.
Why do you think...
Oh, it was my English teacher. He didn't see anything but the me. And I remember going to him and like, my accent, my thing. He goes, without even thinking twice, he's like, start a debate club. I was like, what do I need? He goes, you need a sponsor. I'm your sponsor. You know, I didn't realize what a privilege it was to have that. He was giving me access to his privilege.
In India, you were planning on becoming a doctor. When you graduated from U.S. high school, what did you think you wanted to do as a career?
Oh, journalism. Are you kidding me? And I said, oh, I'm going to be on the radio and then I'm going to be on TV. And I wanted to carve my path to be an anchor. And so I picked up journalism in college, which it broke my poor mother's heart because she really had her heart set on a cardiac surgeon. And it's ironic because I never would have done that if everyone would have just accepted me, right? And I'm so super grateful people cast me to the side because boy, had they not done that, I keep thinking of how I would just become one of the goats. I was meant to stand out, so there was no other choice. So I took up journalism and Spanish literature.
And where did you go to college?
Towson University. At the time, I knew I was going to be the primary caregiver for my parents. They were fully able to take care of themselves. It's just I was already at the time paying for bills, and I knew financially I would be a stronghold for them. So wherever I went, I needed to be close enough. I had let go of my dream of California because my whole, since I landed, was what is the fastest road to California?
Why California?
I wish I had a great reason. I think it's because of Hollywood. I'm such a big movie buff. I mean, my dad and I would go watch 2-3 movies a day.
Did you major in journalism there?
I did, in Spanish literature.
So are there some people or events that influence your career aspirations?
Somewhere along the way, the profession of public relations started to, which is quite different than journalism. Both angles, what you're doing is you're telling the story of somebody. One you could say is more objective, journalism. One is far more, you're making the story. But it was always about the story. And so going into public relations felt like it fit me more because I wanted to make up the story. Back then, I didn't know these words, but this was always in the back of my mind that I'm putting something out in the world and the world then sees what I'm seeing.
So when you graduated, what did you do next?
I was waiting tables. A CEO of a startup would always come by at the bar and sit down, and he just loved my spunk. And he was there with his head of marketing and said, hey, there's this thing called the .com boom that's happening. I said, what? It was 1999. And we would love to have your energy. He pulled me into his world of technology, and the bug bit me right out of college. There were maybe 20, 30 people, and he was just an incredible visionary. So I was part of helping them create what we call the digital divide, and who we were selling to were the underserved urban communities who didn't have access at the time to the last mile, which is the telephone. Back then, the internet. We created an entire brand around it.
So what did you specifically do at that company?
When I went in, it was they had a culture of you're going to pick up the phone and you're going to serve the customer, like customer support, because we want you to learn what it means to be part of a telephone company. Back then, they'd just been deregulated. And so your competitor is also your wholesale, like they're giving you your phone lines. So they would give me like what I call pigtail projects. You can't never really straighten out a pigtail. They would give me this pig and go just straighten the tail, and I would just never give up. One of the pigtail projects was go figure out market sizing of this digital divide. And at that time, I had no idea. I mean, I studied Spanish literature. So
how did you tackle that project?
He had mentioned that there's this thing called the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So I called them and And I said, I will come and sit with you till you teach me. So I drove to DC. And this guy, clearly people don't drive to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and sit with him. He was so excited. So I sat with the statistician till he taught me everything he could. He gave me all the data. And so I became the one person who knew the market. I was the one the CEO would put in front of money people because they want to know, what's this market about? And they're like, yeah, she'll tell you. Sometimes you got to pick up the phone. It's still true.
What led to you leaving that company and what did you do next?
What started happening was at that age, I didn't realize that I would go to work and feel this heaviness of not wanting to go in there and be afraid. And a lot of it was sexual harassment. I just didn't realize it. Telling me that I would look good in his pants. I was too busy being strong. This man had struggled with multiple battles of this, and that's why I'd left corporate. And he struggled with that with quite a few other women. So what was a disservice was the other women, older women, executives, did not come to the support of the other women there, knowing the predatory nature of not just him, but also his general counsel. Well, what I did know was super confusion because here was a man who was spending hours coaching me on becoming an excellent marketing person. I mean, hours on teaching me statistics, hours on presenting who I was. And I felt this benevolence of a CEO who is coaching me and grooming me. Fortunately for me, I'd mentored for a wonderful, wonderful woman. So I'd gone to her, I was volunteering for something and I'd run into her and explain the situation. And I still remember her face. And she had said, if you are ready to leave that, I have a position for you. All of that added up to this sensation of complete confusion. And so going and working for her shifted that mode. And I never really thought about it after that until a long time after.
Okay, so really fortunate someone offered you a job. So what did you do there?
It was a nonprofit, getting people to move to live in Baltimore City. I will say I've had a career of selling and marketing the most interesting products that other people are like, what? What she did for me again was this like thing of, yeah, this is what you'll go do, as if I was supposed to be able to do that. So you don't think, it's a stretch goal. She had me at 22, 23 teaching realtor classes, what the kind of loans and grants and possibilities of neighborhoods and marketing each neighborhood, giving them details. And there I was working with realtors to get them coached up.
What skills did you need in order to be successful at that job?
Being able to teach more than anything, get past my age and what I believed I should know, could know, and speak to serve as opposed to speak to advise and speak to provide opinion.
Explain the difference.
So speaking to serve, I would stand in front of the class with this complete intent of imagining these realtors being able to walk away and make money because of the kind of information I was giving them. So I would always come in with y'all need to make money. This is how you could use when someone comes in, you are able to give them all these additional things that are of no extra cost to you, but to them, you're going to be heroes. Speak to serve was where I set this mindset of customer experience. And the other big thing was a true sense of entrepreneurship, because how do you generate revenue for a nonprofit, right? So we would go make relocation kits, and she had designed the outside look and feel of it. And I would go to all these different places and they would give it to them free and I'd put them together and we'd charge people $10 for each kit.
Live Baltimore made money was selling other kits, and I'm assuming that you charged
for the referral to realtors. Yeah. So we also charged, they would come and think about it. People would come in and what's their first point of contact? Live Baltimore. They're not calling a realtor first. They want to get to know what's happening in the city because we were promoting living in Baltimore City. So whenever we would get that, we'd say, hey, we work with realtors who specialize in knowing neighborhoods and they can connect you to your next home. And then my job was to give referrals to realtors. So they paid to be part of that referral bank.
Why did you leave?
I wanted to be generating revenue. I wanted to be building business. And
why?
I wish I could tell you, but my family's full of healers or doctors and nurses. And I mean, if we could stop talking about past life, that's the only other option. It's not like I grew up having a lot of examples of it either. I naturally gravitated towards, I hadn't even seen boardrooms in movies. I still just remember having this vivid image of me at the head of a big round circle table. I don't know where this table came from. I just remember being at the head of it and running the show. And I just started researching on where do people get to do that? And they were like, you gotta go be the boss. So I just always knew I'd be the boss. When you know that and you've seen this image of you leading people and whatever that looks like, you know how you hear people say, nobody grows up dreaming they'll go to an office and And I go, no, actually, someone does.
So how did you find that?
So that dream came back up again a lot and it started because Tracy gave me the opportunity to speak in front of people. And then I said, I want to go do this. I want to go drive a business. So the very first step, I just started to look for an opportunity, and it happened to be in technology. They were looking for a marketing person. It was a systems integration type company.
So how did you find that opportunity?
It's the only opportunity to this day that didn't just land on my doorstep. That one I actually had to go look for and apply. To this day, I don't know what about my resume, because I was working for a nonprofit got me in the door. But what I learned then was, once I get in the door, interviews aren't challenging for me, because I will show up as myself. And if the role is described as it is, we'll get the gig.
So you were a marketing manager there?
Mm-hmm.
And how was that different from what you had been doing before?
So this stint wasn't my most empowered. The founder had run certain things a certain way, whereas I was used to bosses, for better or worse, that just said, you can do that. And it was 10x bigger than I'd ever done. So here it was completely opposite. He'd give me these piecemeal sized, like, go write this one article or go do this, because there was a sense of like, what will she do if you just give her too much rein? So I found it very constricting, and I think he struggled with me. I struggled with him. Now, but it was a great place for me to discover. It's the first time I went from like having seen myself in a boardroom to, I want a seat at the table. So what does one do? And it occurred to me, I need to know my financials. You need to fall in love with the business and the money. So I knew I had to go to business school at that time.
Was there something that started shifting that for you?
What happened was, after the disappointment, and I would say the shame of the way I left, and I still hadn't dealt with it from my telecom startup, I finally started to go, God, there was so much about that I hadn't picked up. Having the right EBITDA and being able to show that you can drive revenue. This isn't just some, of course, back in the day, people were getting funded without having shown any path to revenue.
They still do.
Right? They still do. So that company was different. They had generated revenue. So but I didn't know any of the language. I was like, what is EBITDA? Why do you need to know what's an income statement? And why is that so different than cash flow statement? So I knew then that if I wanted to have that seat and ever start my company, I needed to go learn the basics. I chose business school, and very specifically because I wanted access to the people in the world of business, and I had none. I had no network. So I caught on to this whole idea of privilege and access at a pretty young age.
I was just thinking about like recognizing the privilege and access.
And that I didn't have to have it on my own. Somebody else could give me access to it. And in the spirit of full disclosure, for the most part, it's been really powerful white men who've made it happen for me.
Well, because they are there.
What they loved about each one of them is, my God, your work ethic and your relentlessness. So at the end of the day, these were men who recognized their privilege and at the same time had a purest view of what was needed for the business to run. And that was something I could work with. I could show you relentlessness, and I could show you this other thing called work ethic. And I found out that the third thing that almost didn't matter was being smart. It actually didn't matter as much as the ability to be relentless and resourcefulness in solving problems. And so, learning access and privilege and recognizing I didn't need to have it. I just needed to go be there and put myself in a place, and they'll just pull me in.
I like that. So you went to University of Maryland.
Yeah. I again picked universities that had entrepreneurship so that I could be building my business while I was in college. And I wanted a program that what I didn't do in undergrad was go study abroad. Because my mama in her infinite wisdom said, sweetie, you are abroad. Please can you learn the American culture?
Where'd you go?
I didn't. I picked a university that would allow for that, to do a global programship.
Yeah.
But it's also where I did start traveling. My business school friends, Malika in particular, just this like super powerful New Yorker from Brooklyn, just introduced me to travel. She said, I haven't been anywhere. We're going to Belize for spring break. I'm like, really? And that changed my life. I haven't stopped backpacking since then.
When you were getting your MBA, were you full-time? Were you working?
I was full-time, yeah. I doused myself in it. My then mentor who gave me my first gig, Jeff, he hired me while I was still in school, even though I resisted it because I was in graduate assistantship and I was working for a venture capital firm. He said, you can handle it. It was quite a bit. My goal was to network. And what I learned about networking then was what I already knew, which is serve.
So can you talk about one particular relationship that you nurtured?
I would say one of the closest relationships I developed, a couple of them were Malika and Kristy. I gravitated towards, didn't realize it at the time, towards women of color. And
were they your same year?
Yeah.
Okay.
One's Filipino, one's Black. At the time, I didn't realize it. We could have spurned each other, right? Because we're alpha, and they could have said, boy, this girl is out to get whatever she can and she's all business, or they could have made me out to be that person. Instead, they brought me in closer. When I went through a breakup, there was Kristy who pulled me in and nurtured me. My body just said, see ya. And she nurtured me through that, took me home and to her family. And Malika is the one who said, you're going through this stuff. We might as well do it in Belize. She said, while in Belize, we're going to not talk about this. She completely changed my life because after that, travel became a portal. I say a portal because portals are where you leave one energy field and you go to another so you can experience yourself in a way you've never experienced yourself. And then you bring that person back. Ended up backpacking with her.
Where'd you backpack?
So we did Asia. She'd already done Asia. I think she was just kind and generous, and because I'd never done anything, everything she planned would be meticulous, and I would pick places with bed bugs. And she'd go, I told you to book things, and I'd say, I have the first night figured out. Couldn't we figure out the rest when we get there? And I realized that was my travel style to this day. And she recently called me and said, I'm trying out your style. This whole book one thing and then figure it out. And it warmed the cockles of my heart.
So you finish your MBA,
yeah,
and you get it in finance and strategy. What's next?
I wanted to be that person, be that woman person that's gonna just rock that spreadsheet. I just was so much better at feeling the energy of a room and getting people to buy into ideas that they couldn't even fathom they would. So I gravitated towards marketing and sales because of that.
You were a consultant with Bearing Point?
I did. I wasn't done with schooling as such.
Okay.
And consulting just gave that space.
Is there a memorable project or company that you worked with during your time?
The largest stint was Cisco, the food distribution company. And the project is memorable for a few reasons. Number one, again, I landed up with an engagement manager and a managing director who were like, oh yeah, you go hang out with the COO and the head of this because you can go drive revenue doing this. Over time, when I look back, I was always pushed into go make us the money role. I kept resisting that till this particular role. So that project is memorable because I had to prove my financial modeling skills. The company had just acquired $2 billion in assets, and they had to figure out how to make the business units profitable. I just thoroughly enjoyed traveling the country, meeting the different operating centers, very male-driven environments. I was walking into chicken coop plants and vegetable cutting plants, and this 28-year-old walking in and interviewing sales executives. So that was an incredible experience.
So what skills were required?
Interviewing. You cannot be a strategic thinker and not love problems. You must love the discovery of problems and the discovery of business and business models. We would, for example, there are case interviews that companies at McKinsey do. Why do they do that? They're looking to see how you solve problems. In order to do that, you have to love defining the problem first. And so a huge part of the skill set is that they call it being analytical. For me, it is still less about being analytical. And there's so much pushed in about linear thinking, and it's step one, step two, you do your SWOT analysis. So I learned all those pieces. What I learned though is the ones who really are problem solvers are hyper creative, hyper lateral thinkers. And so I learned that of myself, that I would go in and solve problems in a way that most of the linear thinkers had not cracked the code yet. The best thing that ever happened to me in that span of my career was that this development of structured curiosity and scientific thinking, the best thing strategy consulting gives you.
Did Bearing Point have a philosophy on how they did these interviews, or was that something that you figured out on your own? How did you know how to become this better type of interviewer?
The type of thinking of hypothesis-driven interviewing is there. They teach you a lot of that. And frankly, while we were part of Bearing Point, we put a lot of hours into grooming your ability, because you're taking in 27, 28-year-olds and putting them around executives. The only way you can make that gap in age and experience work is if you give frameworks within which these guys can then solve problems.
Hey Standouts! In each episode, I like to take something my guest says and provide a resource on how you can develop that skill. So this week, my resource is related to curiosity. As a consultant, Sowmya learned how to apply structured curiosity when she was interviewing her clients. If you consider a lack of curiosity a flat side, check out the book Curious by Ian Leslie. One of the chapter titles is Stay Foolish, so I think it might be light and helpful. A link to the book can be found on the show notes page at nts.today/4 or check your local library. Was there someone or some situation that helped or hindered you?
I'd say help. Richie, you couldn't have picked a man more opposite than me.
Also,
super linear thinking, super structured, very stoic, contained. I think the fact that I would wear a banana yellow shirt, I found out later used to drive him nuts, but he was just a lover of talent. And what was great about him is that he saw what I could bring to the table and never once made me feel out of place for who I was. And he accessed that. He needed to understand the temperature read of the team and the energy of the team. It's me he'd pull in and go, okay, give me a read. Where's everyone? And this was a demarcation of where I knew what I was bringing to the table wasn't being measured. The fit of this energy thing. So the good news was the seed was planted that I bring something to the table that one is going to threaten a lot of people. Two, if it doesn't, they'll want to capitalize on it. Those are the people I want to gravitate towards because at the end of the day, this is business. This is about driving revenue and you want somebody who gets what you can do to drive revenue. And the third part is most corporations don't know how to measure energy, especially spiritual energy. So
who does?
Right. All of it means you have a sense of groundedness that allows you to deal with a high threshold of uncertainty that's thrown at you. And the person who gets rooted in their truth and their inner voice is the one you want in the room because everyone else is feeding off of that energy and also learning how to stay grounded in theirs. So then you are in that position with full joy because what else you got?
So how did you nurture that in yourself?
It didn't. I fought that a lot. And at the peak of fighting it was in strategy consulting. I was so hardcore focused on being linear and analytical. I had to fall pretty heavily on my face in my personal life in order to get to a place to understand that I will keep getting shaken if I don't go figure out how to stand in my voice. And so while at work it looked like I was all strong and Shira, the reality was I wasn't fitting in and it was definitely a bit frustrating. Personally, what was happening, if you remember, I talked about man in business school. We were moving towards the path of marriage. And as we got closer, his parents were excited. My parents were like, hey, when's this ring coming? And it was earth-shattering for me, and I'm sure for him as well. Sowmya, I don't want our kids to be disadvantaged because they're not going to be white. If I married you and we had children, they wouldn't be white and it wouldn't work out. And so I'd like to say this is the first time that happened to me. It was actually the second time, and it was the only 2 times I thought of love and marriage. And so that shook the entire core of me. Why is that important to career? It's important because something like that is attached to core center. You don't show up to work as anyone else but you. And I fundamentally had to say, okay, it's all connected. I'm the same girl here and there. And what am I doing that he didn't see that I'm not white? And that's the beginning of me going on a search mission and discovering truths about myself, because until then I had never spent any time in self-awareness. It was very much about analyzing others. And it was one of the first truths that came out of that process I had begun on my own was, Sowmya, you've been so involved in fitting in that you don't realize how much you've become white, mainstream white in your culture, and everything from the way you dress to the way, not so much you speak, but in the way that you don't embrace the nuances of your culture and your roots in India. And so doing that allowed me to climb where I was in my corporate career. And I really couldn't blame my then boyfriend for having seen white. until he had to procreate with me. He didn't walk out the door. I did. I wasn't fully me. Had we married, and more than likely he would have made his quote unquote sacrifice and married a non-white person. It would have worked out. It was my awakening to say, you have completely killed this inner voice so you could sound and have the privilege of a white person. That was the beginning of self-awareness.
You leave Bearing Point. Why?
So Bearing Point at the time was going through a financial and spiritual crisis at the same time. The then CEO really played the game very poorly. So in financial terms, we had day sales outstanding. It was 120 days. What that means is it doesn't matter how much revenue you're bringing in. If you're not collecting, you are in deep doo-doo. I could have continued in consulting. Consulting doesn't give you the ability to roll up your sleeve and actually implement this idea. I knew who I was by now.
And who were you?
Someone who would disrupt the business as usual. I needed the latitude to go into an industry that was ripe with disruption, and that was technology.
So this is when you went to Dell Tech?
I did.
And how did you find that opportunity?
The head of sales and consulting, she had gone on to become the head of sales of this company, Dell Tech. So Carolyn Perron, I went and met her and I said, Carolyn, I think I want to. She just nabbed me and she said, we're looking for a product marketing person. It's mainly strategy. You already done it. Sizing markets, messaging, you got this.
So what does Dell Tech do?
We had an ERP specifically for project run businesses. What are project run businesses? Architects, engineers, consultants, government contracting.
So you have the strategy experience. What other skills did it require for you to be successful in that job?
Evangelism. Product marketing is primarily about taking the vision of the product and the company and putting it in the language of the customer and evangelizing. You're spending 25 to 30% of your time on a soapbox. Another big part is to start seeing the trends in the marketplace and translate that into market requirements and be able to work with the product team on. And the other one is driving demand. How do you drive demand to a product line? We would hook them in with the value and then demonstrate the product, and the rest is history.
You were there for a few years. Why did you leave?
At the time, leadership was changing, and most of the folks who had groomed me, and including Carolyn, were all exiting left. And I was no different than anyone else. When your senior leadership leaves, it gives you a moment to pause and go, is this where I want to be? Where is the future for me? And one of the things I recognized was all the things I wanted to gain from the company in terms of building a brand, driving demand, becoming a product marketing strategist. I'd gotten all those pieces and I wanted to explore more. And again, I hadn't gone looking. Jeff, who had been my mentor in business school, came back and said, hey, I just became the Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer of UNICEF. I was like, I want to go west, Jeff. And he goes, yeah, but you're going to work directly with the CEO and me. And one thing I'd learned through Access and Privilege was sponsorship. Go where there's sponsorship, because that's very different than mentoring and coaching. Sponsor is someone who can give you access to privilege, period. End of story.
So Jeff was someone that you knew from MBA school?
He had seen me in a case competition and said I would work for him. He ended up hiring me into Bearing Point.
So that was a long stretch from MBA school to going to UNICEF. What did you do in the interim to continue
the
to nurture
relationship?
that?
We've had such a bond that anytime I pick up the phone, it feels like I just spoke to you the other day, and we're so vulnerable with each other. Who I see of me in his eyes when I met him, he looked at me and I remember him saying, you don't know what I know that I know about you. You're a CEO. Can you trust me until you see it? So there was this other world relationship of this dude that just believed in me and vice versa. His whole goal was to give me this space where I got to be my fullest. And so when I look back on it, what a freaking gift. I would give my power away in a meeting. He'd go, don't ever give me credit again for what you did. And I'd go, okay, got it. He was teaching me power. Along the way, what happened was I became his peer. And I remember the first meeting, just like profusely thanking him for getting me to this position, like as if I was some acceptance speech, right? He pulled me aside and said, you were in a room full of your equals. Now, by the way, he was telling this to a girl who was 34. Every man in that room, except for one, was a 55-plus-year-old white male. No one looked like me. And to completely get into the space of you belong here, overnight wasn't going to happen. But it did happen in that instance when he said, don't ever give me credit for what work you have done. That's really what he was teaching me. was you don't give power away that way. All I did was open the door. And because he didn't understand that doors just don't fly open.
Because they flew open for him, I'm sure.
What he taught me was that you gotta feel that was, of course, the doors flew open. Until you feel that, no one else will feel it.
So as a head of marketing, what did you do for UNICEF?
So I still reported to a CMO because there was 3 different business units. UNICEF is mostly known as a services company. It's also why, and the technology part was becoming lesser and lesser, but how do you get rid of the business unit that drives most of your profit, right? I went in because they had convinced me that we are becoming a product company. So that was why I went into UNICEF, because I said, wow, what a challenge to take this really old brand and to start re-energizing it and bringing in what I call a challenger brand. And that's my specialty.
So what skills did you have to learn for you to be good in that role?
To be the David in the Goliath story. And for that, you can't fight like the big boys. So what does that mean? Gartner is a big, very well-known research institution. And so being established and putting your name into their magic quadrants and being known also opens a lot of doors. Okay, what if your technology hasn't been established? You have a product that's so ahead, you can't use that tool. So now as a challenger brand, you have to have skills on where could you go and establish that you are the brand to follow. Oh, by the way, forget the brand, that you are the technology type to follow. The way you do that with challenger brands is you completely ignore all the other type of marketing money and spend that people are doing. And you start establishing yourself in places that your customers are still looking. And then you start using language, other things that say, for example, one of our campaigns we ran was you can't hack what you can't see. Our technology was about cloaking and then shredding information into such tiny bits that nobody could pick it up until it got to the other end of the pipe. That caught a lot of momentum. So we just drove business by questioning status quo. And boy, I literally spent my entire life to be that person.
Okay. Sounds like Jeff was very instrumental in helping you at this job. Were there any other people or situations that were influential in preparing you for your next role?
So if Jeff were here, he'd ask me to correct you. All he did was open the door, and there was literally nothing else he did. And I'm not saying that because I'm sure Jeff will be listening to this if he knows I'm speaking a podcast. It has nothing to do with his desire to help me or anything like that. But I'd reached a place in my game where the doors were all open. I just needed to walk through. And I started to do that. I started to spend more time with Dominic, who was the head of the business unit. And then he was the one who went to Quincy and said, I want her to run marketing for me. Very strong, paternal leadership with a lot of, you're here because I trust in your ability and you can run with it. And so that trust, again, since you asked which person, his trust in me, he never one day looked at me any differently than his chief technology officer or the gentleman to this day who's one of my close friends. We were a tight team.
So Dominic, when you went to him, what types of questions or things did you do in order to, I'm not going to say exert your power, but to showing you how to step into your power as a CMO?
Dom and I spent 30-minute clips. He taught me that you didn't need time to access power, you needed energy, and you spend your energy wisely. So the fact that he would give me 30 minutes meant something. The point being, we did talk about his daughters, and he clearly had a sense of raising strong women. And more importantly, power or establishing your sense of self-inner voice, all of that was about leaving all the other voices of, oh my God, I don't belong here. Come straight to the issue. Call the issue out. Hey, is someone on the team not playing well? And is that impacting your ability to deliver? Ask them for advice if you think he can solve the problem. That's it. So the communication was always clear of any stories. So clean, clear language, vulnerable, being able to say, this I don't know how to do, or this is not going to work out well. Always knowing my details when I walked in so he can rely upon me when he would step in. And then I'd ask questions like, it's one of my favorite questions. Why do we think we'd fail? Because there's always that energy of this won't work out. And I'd make room for people to say it won't work out because. So when they cleared all the stuff, and I wouldn't try to solve all their problems, but 80% of it would disappear the minute they voiced it. So I only had to contend with 20% of the BS. And out of that 20%, 10% was legit. So he watched these kind of things and just kept making room for me to do it.
I think there were like two key things from your interview is owning your power and then making room.
There's one other thing, if I may. And that has to do with Quincy. Quincy, who was the Chief Marketing Officer, he's the Chief Marketing Officer for IBM's cloud business. And he was the first place where I fully felt safe to keep failing. And he would just make the space to go, enough to go, okay, that wasn't how it was supposed to go. And these are the consequences, but that's okay, stand up. So one of the things I notice that is across a lot of the alpha women, myself included, is because of what we believe we had to do to get to where we got, we tell ourselves we cannot fail. Unfortunately, you cannot get past middle management and you will not sustain leadership. Why? Because you are transmitting this energy of I cannot fail, and you have an entire team, an entire business that will not sustain itself because you just told everyone with your energy you cannot fail. The biggest part about, and call it a ladder to where I am now, is this complete freedom to fuck up.
But what does that look like from a leader? I feel that sometimes leaders say that, but then their actions don't match what they are saying.
They're not really allowing it to happen.
Okay. What was it about Quincy and your current boss that let you know that that was really true?
I'll take Shiva because we've dovetailed right into my current position. Shiva and I are off by a year. And why do I say that? Because there's a sense of kinship of experience. But in terms of experiencing building a business, he's eons ahead. He built a $15 million business way before I ever stepped in. And the board had said, you need a CMO. So I'd walked into a position where he had brought me in because he was told he needed me. And so he left a lot of leeway and rope. So what did I do? I ran with it because I thought I needed to demonstrate results immediately. One of the agencies I hired sucked up a big part of our budget, and they were a big company, PR company. They sucked at giving us the attention, and it was humiliating, and it was so much money for us. When I look back, spending money to make money was where I'd come from. And so I wasn't willing to take the ownership of that had happened. And it was my CEO who stepped in and said, look, the reason you're doing what you're doing is because I pushed you. It's my sense of impatience that got you where you are. I told the board it's me that drove you. And in that moment, he made it okay for me to fuck up. Because he told me in that moment, you fuck up, I got your back. And I'm the one this falls on, not you. So now get up, go. But this time, the rope's going to be a lot tighter. And that I did not like. So for a good year, we had a tight rope and we had to walk that plank together. And now we walk in, we have this choreography of how we walk into deals, how we walk into clients that we're implementing. I'm his wingman. I build him up. It wouldn't have happened if he didn't step in and make it okay. Can you please snap out of your ego and stop thinking that you got to get it all right? Because the longer you stayed locked in that place of ego, the less useful you are.
So how did the CEO find you?
He actually found someone who worked for me. And she reached out to me and said, this executive recruiter company's come looking for me. And at that point, I'd gotten very clear of what I was looking for. I had said to people who knew me, hey, unless it's a seat at the table at a disruptive technology company, I'm just going to do consulting projects. I'm good. I've just been laid off from UNICEF. And I had, by the way, went west. I built my own pipeline for a consulting project. For the life of me, I didn't think I'd be in LA, but here I am. This is what I've found time and again. We hedge our bets because we believe that will give us a wider portfolio of opportunities. Reality actually worked quite the opposite. When you you burn your bridges and you drop everything else and you said, I'm walking that path and I don't need to walk back this way. And that's what I'm choosing. I think it was 2 weeks later that my colleague knocked on my door and said, hey, I think I have something for you in LA. And I went, yeah, okay. And within 3 weeks of that, they hired me.
Oh, wow.
So life does work that way. I always say there's freedom and commitment. And in fact, that's the only kind of freedom. And when you fully commit, all the other noises just go away.
Yeah. But key words. Fully commit.
Fully commit. Yes.
Yeah. So you are working at 7 Lakes Technology, but you also have another special project that you're working on. Do you want to tell everyone about that?
Definitely. If you haven't caught on to the theme in this podcast, I've only dropped alpha woman in there a few times. Throughout my journey of self-awareness and using business as my spiritual grounds for growth, what I recognized was, boy, it would have been great while I was going through all of this, had there been a place that told me right in the beginning, fuck up and fuck up a lot and experiment, have hypotheses, cultivate this incredible curiosity. If I could just take those 10 years and put that many more quests in front of me and make it a normal part of my living, I can't help but think what that would have done for me to not necessarily dismiss my alpha, but to make that alpha in me far more focused. And so what I'm creating is a digital lab designed for alpha women to practice their inner voice. But I think the biggest distinction in this lab is this. As an alpha woman, I've chased spirituality like I did everything else, like a goal. It doesn't work that way. It's a lifestyle. Soul Quotient is the lab's name. The idea of being part of this membership is to connect with other women who operate in extremes, and not for that to go away. But when you operate in the extremes, how can you now be amongst a group of women with whom you don't have to explain yourself? That's the Soul Quotient lab that is going to launch in September.
Well, now we are on to our rapid fire section. So when you need a boost of confidence, what do you do?
What I just did. I take incredible deep breaths. There's something about creating space. So usually when I don't feel confidence is because I felt like the space, like I have no space to be. And so what I do is I create space. I just breathe like unnaturally long breaths, like I'm having some kind of possessed, shamanic breath. And it just all of a sudden makes me feel like a superstar. It really helps in board meetings.
Okay, so I have this book. It's called Listography, and it is a way of doing a autobiography of yourself through list. I want you to pick a number between 5 and 135.
Okay, 9.
Places you've lived.
Oh, that's a good one. Bangalore, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Columbia, Maryland, Rio Vista, California, and Los Angeles, California.
Oh, you've lived some places.
Yeah.
Very cool. What is something that you geek out about?
So I love teeny bop music.
Examples?
So they're not memorable enough for me, okay? So I can't claim for it to be memorable. But
you
I
can
will
sing it.
No, neither. I can't do either. But what I will tell you is the reason I say geek out is I live in such depth most of the time. Revenue, numbers, soul quotient. I mean, come on, right? And so when I just need to be, I'll just turn on like Korean pop.
So you're a big K-pop fan? I have a friend that is totally into K-dramas, and she tries so hard for me to get into them too. She's like, I promise you, Yolanda, if you just try this one, you're going to be like, why did it take you so long to get into this? And I'm like, okay. What I like to ask people about is squad care. So who are some people in your life that you turn to when you need help?
That squad has changed over periods of my life. As you can imagine, as you grow into who you are, that changes. The one constant is my mother. She is my nutritionist, my spiritual mama jamma. She can feel my energy. So she's my squad from just her presence and her friendship and her ability to call out my bullshit with grace. Another person on my squad is my trainer. Any good leader should get a trainer. Just someone who just gets you out of your seat and go work out. And he's a wellness coach, Mike Gonzalez. He runs Entrepreneurship Academy. So he's a big part of that squad because there's a sense of discipline and rigor, and also the woman that I'm becoming that he's a big part of. And I would say the third person, without a doubt, is my current CEO. I spend 60 hours a week with this man. There's a level of leaning in and being an open soul that works for us.
Who are some women of color possibility models? And that's someone who shows you that it's possible to live your dreams. So there's some people that inspire you.
Does it have to could it be fictional characters too?
I put no. My only requirement is that it's a woman of color.
So I'm feeling slightly ashamed because I tend to be terrible with remembering names, but I remember their entire persona and their spirit. So please go with me here. There is a woman who started, I believe her name is Richie, a woman who started an organization named Apne Aap. It is an organization in India that primarily focuses on extricating women from brothels, because red light districts are huge in India, and prostitution is a way of how these women have to make a livelihood, and then their daughters get into it at the minute they come of age. So she brings them out of these, or gets them educated and moves them into spaces, and what it takes to go be in that space and bring women who otherwise wouldn't have had that, just insane. So to me, that's incredibly powerful. There's another woman named the name of Kiran Bedi. She is, and I don't know if she still is, a police commissioner that brought yoga into prisons and started to transform men who had committed insane amount of crime, and started to holistically change policing. Coming here to America, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up Oprah, because on TV, it was mainly white people. She was the only person of color. And I went, oh, good, there's a connection. And then watching her and tracking her career has been phenomenal. And I love what she's done to bring other women in. I mean, I just gave you a list of them. I could keep going on it.
Well, you said a fictional character, but you didn't tell me a fictional character.
Well, Olivia Pope. You know what I'm saying? I was in D.C. I was living in D.C. when Scandal came out.
Wait, what seasons? Because there is a point where Olivia is I'm no longer a fan of
Olivia. Way earlier.
Okay.
Way earlier.
Like seasons 1 and 2?
Yeah.
Olivia? Okay.
Exactly. So yes. And so back then, living in Washington, D.C. and being around all of that, and then recognizing that kind of power and being a fixer, my God. Really, it's Shonda Rhimes that I'm praising.
Okay. If people want to find you online, where would you suggest they go?
thesoulquotient.com.
If you can go back in time and give your teenage self some advice, what would you tell her?
Stop leaving your body. I know that your first experiences with your body was forceful and sex was taken from you. Stop leaving your body. Keep going back into it and stop disconnecting from it, because your body will give you a lot of information. Stay in it as much as you can. And you are not just your beauty. You have a lot more to offer than your sex.
Do you think that affected how you approach things in your career as well?
100%, because you cannot exercise power if you're not in your body, if you can't claim your sex first. There's a reason in Indian culture we call it the root chakra. It's the place from which your energy source, and for a woman, her womb, there's a reason it's a hole. It's a place of creation. It's a place where nothingness becomes everythingness, and there is nothing else in the world that does that. So if you fundamentally disconnect from that place of power of creation, then everything about me became about looking for validation externally, finding healing externally, and not knowing that I didn't need to seek it outside of myself. And finally, that because we are the only source of creation, then there's a power that comes with just being in the room. You literally need to do nothing else when you're a woman. Your presence itself is all that is required, and you cannot claim that until you go back into your body.
And there you have it, Standouts. I really enjoyed chatting with Sowmya. Here are a few things I learned or that stood out to me during our conversation. Number 1, I learned that Sowmya was born in Bangalore and she moved to the US when she was 16. I was shocked when I found this out during our interview because I just assumed she was born in the US because she doesn't have an accent. Number 2, I also learned that I've been pronouncing Sowmya's name incorrectly since I met her, and she didn't even correct me during our interview. It reminded me of one of my favorite quotes by Warsan Shire, and she says, "Give your daughters difficult names. Give your daughters names that command the full use of tongue. My name makes you want to tell me the truth. My name doesn't allow me to trust anyone that cannot pronounce it right." And then number 3, one of the things that I learned that influenced a lot of Sowmya's life decisions was her need to be in close proximity to her parents. She chose an undergraduate college that was near her parents. her first job because of its location to her parents, and her parents had to agree to move with her to the West Coast before she made the move to California. I wish I would have dug deeper into this family dynamic and asked her how this decision came to be and how it has affected her life. After each episode, I'd like to pose a question and get listeners to share their thoughts about the topic. So this episode's listener feedback question is related to the story of Sowmya's boyfriend, and when he finally realized that if they got married and had kids, their kids wouldn't be white. But what that helped Sowmya realize was how much she'd become mainstream white in her culture, so much so that her boyfriend was colorblind. Okay, y'all, that's me being sarcastic. Back to the question I have for you. Instead of asking for stories about how you've hidden parts of yourself in order to fit in, I want to do something a little bit different. So tell me, what is something about yourself that you are very vocal about or you wish you were more vocal about? It can be an accomplishment, a personality trait, whatever. I want to hear your brags. So tell me about them. Record yourself feeling yourself and send your audio to podcast@notthestandout.club. I'll compile a bunch of responses into a mini episode. The background music for this episode is from Ryan Little. All things we discussed in this episode can be found on the show notes page at nts.today/4. If you like this episode, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with your friends and also rated the podcast on your podcast listening platform. This helps other people find the show. Go to nts.today/rate for instructions on how to rate the podcast.